Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Our topic tonight is the Islamic threat in Tennessee and America. Our guest is retired New York police officer Cathy Hinners, who is also the author of Muslim Brotherhood, The Threat in Our Backyard. She also has a blog called Daily Roll Call that covers the Islamic and other threats in our state and county, in our state and country, that is. Cathy, thank you for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again.
Well, it's always good to have you and get an update. I know you've been watching, as I have, the stuff that's going on in Britain between the native population and the mostly Muslim migrants that began flooding their country over 30 years ago, and that's greatly increased in recent years. I don't think people here understand the threat in the U.S., despite 9/11 and everything else. What are you seeing that concerns you over there that you think is either already here or is going to be here real soon?
Well, I do think it's coming here real soon because there's always that trend of, the migration issue over there and then planted on here. It's exactly the same. So let me step back, though, to about a week ago. There was an incident at a young man, a 17-year-old who they're deeming as a boy, stabbed and killed 3 young girls at a dance studio. Several other women were stabbed as well, many of them still in critical condition. So the police obviously arrested him, but before they could do that, on social media, it went out that he was Muslim. And then that created a huge ripple effect. And then we had the next day, thousands of citizens in that Southport area went to the streets to demand justice for these little girls. The police are very hands-off over there. In particular, in this case, they were squashing the fact that this boy may be a Muslim. They won't tell us, they won't tell anybody if this boy is a Muslim or not, but the fact that he did what the Muslims are known to be doing, chances are he is Muslim. So now, over the last few days, this is all escalated. You've got the British government stating that they will affect the full face of the law against what they're deeming right-wingers. And so he calls them the thugs, he calls them right-wingers, which I guess that must sound familiar. This is what, our own government is calling us. But the problem now is that they're pitting those that are pro-Muslim, pro-migrant status, they're pitting their protests next to the right-winger protests. And in the middle are the Muslims. And the Muslims are also destroying property, they're firebombing pubs and things like that. But law enforcement is heavy-handed with the left side and the Muslims. And so that's just fueling this fire. So the cities are starting to grow as far as how many protests there are, how many riots there are. But the surrounding cities like Sheffield, Leicester, Birmingham, they all have Muslim mayors. So this is not helping any. You've got the Muslims hitting the streets. They've always had their Sharia-compliant neighborhoods, but it's all on fire right now. I mean, there's massive riots going on, and we're just not seeing a lot of it on our national news. We're not seeing much of it at all. Today, though, at 11:30 this morning, in a place called Leicester Square, which is a huge tourist attraction in the city of London, we had an 11-year-old girl stabbed and her 34, I believe it was her mother, 34-year-old woman. We have not seen the condition of those two, but again, they were stabbed and an arrest was made, but they're not saying, as they don't say here, who was arrested, what their name is and what their background is, because they're trying to squash any problems. So all that to say, with the number of Muslims increasing in the UK, we aren't far behind. And I'll read you, and Dave, I've got a lot of notes because my head is filled with stuff to tell you, so I want to make sure. But some of the notes from England are kind of disturbing. They did a census, the first time that they've done a census of England and Wales. It showed an increase of Muslims in that country from 4.9% in 2011 to 6.5 in 2021. And that's probably also, that number's probably going quite higher in 2024. There's just no figures, or they hide the figures. So when you look at the number of Muslims in America, it's pretty much the same story, where the number of Muslims coming in along our border, they've opened the doors. We know that there's a lot of Muslims from various countries that have entered. And we can get into later on about, the percentage of illegals that this administration has released into the country. And I think that it's pretty disturbing, and people really should be paying attention. We've been saying for years and years about the Muslims, not even illegals, we'll just call them the migrants that are coming into this country, has been a problem. But now added to that is the additional open borders, where we know they've had some men come in from Tajikistan, which they are attached to ISIS, and they have been released into this country. We're talking maybe 4 or 5, which isn't a large number, but do we really need ISIS members in our country? So that's kind of scary.
So question on that. Did they find out after the fact? After they released them, they found out, oh, they were ISIS? How did that come about? Do you know?
No, I think this will bother you, because we go back to the vetting, how Mayorkas and this administration talks about how all these people are vetted over a period of time. And the problem is they're not vetting them against the databases in their own country. They're comparing them to the databases, the criminal databases in our country. So obviously, if they've never been here before, there's no record of them.
And that's assuming the countries they come
from.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. A lot of these countries, especially like Somalia and some of these third world countries, how do you expect them to have the means to have a vetting system? I mean, they don't have databases, they don't have computers, they don't have driver's licenses or birth certificates. So many of them, when they come here, they don't even know a date of birth. So they give them January 1st of some whatever year they think they might have been born. So the vetting process, while they're up there saying, that they're so sure who these people are, there's the facts. And that comes from the Center of Immigration Studies, a very non-biased, good source, good resources on immigration. And so
real quick,
that I find really disturbing. When we had all the Afghanis come in, they were saying the same thing, that they vetted these people. A lot of them had been translators. That's all well and good. But there were several that came in, actually into the city of Nashville, took in 600 Afghani nationals during that period of August, when that whole horrible thing happened in Afghanistan, when we tried to pull out. So we know that there are 600 Afghanis living in Nashville, or wherever they are now. But when you look at the vetting, come on, they weren't vetted. And this is indicative of a problem with this administration, who does not care, about what's happening in this country. So
let me say something about the whole vetting, the whole idea of vetting the Afghanis. Even when our troops were over there before the pullout, okay, every now and then you would have a situation where some Afghani who was supposed to be on our side, and he was on one of our FOBs, one of our bases, and then he's trying to kill Americans, or in some cases did kill Americans. So vetting in that part of the world means nothing. It's especially when you're dealing with Islam. I mean, hey, they can lie in Islam. It's encouraged, in fact. So the whole thought that we can vet anybody from an Islamic country, and that ignores their doctrine, which that's one of the things that really gets me, is after all these years, after 9/11, neither our federal government or our state government understands or is willing to admit, I think it's more a question of willing to admit, that, hey, look, they're really not compatible with our society, with our Constitution. They will always be a threat. And it just irritates me that we have not done that. That our governments have not stepped up on that.
Well, I thought about this earlier. It's amazing that when law enforcement and intelligence agencies foil a terrorist plot, we praise them, and we're so happy that they foiled this plot. And the same actually with the mass, you know, the mass murders that happen, mass shootings or whatever. You know, we say, oh yeah, they have averted a mass shooting today, and this is wonderful, and it is great. But what I don't understand is we've had foreign terrorist Islamic organizations. Let me leave out the word terrorist for a minute. We've had foreign Islamic organizations in this country that have been declaring and proclaiming for years that they would come from within and that they would subvert our own government. That's even before they get violent. And we know they've been doing it. We see, you know, how Detroit, Michigan and Hamtramck, Michigan, we've seen how, as their elected officials, we have them in Nashville. And so, you know, they're here and they've been telling us for years, it's on paper, it's in black and white, their documents have evidentiary value, and yet our intelligence agencies and law enforcement and many U.S. citizens embrace them and support them. I mean, Hamas is probably one of the worst organizations in this country. They are on our foreign domestic FTO, the Foreign Terrorist Organization from the U.S. State Department. Hamas is on that list. And yet, you know, we look at Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and ISIS. Hamas is no different than them. Hamas just doesn't outwardly kill people yet.
Right.
But, you know, so you look at these pro-Palestine and Hamas, they're not even protests. They're just flat out riots. And you, especially, you know, just talking about how the police interact differently with different groups. We've seen that here in this country. You know, we look at January 6th and what a sham that was. And the same thing is happening in the UK, and that will again take its place here when people get tired of this here. It's going to happen here. But we just saw it happen in the end of July when Hamas and pro-Palestine rioters were actively desecrating our flag. They were removing our flag, which I believe is a felony, to remove the flag and replace it with the flag of Palestine. They damaged, probably permanently damaged the Liberty Bell by writing Hamas is here, Hamas is coming. And yet law enforcement has not made one arrest in any of those cases.
And since that's happened,
so
I haven't heard anything about it, period. I mean, much less arrest. It's like it happened one day and then you haven't heard anything else about it.
No, and I think in part, it was probably kind of a distraction, or what they were using as a distraction this past weekend was it's been 10 years since Michael Brown got killed in Ferguson. And so, you know, that was something they'd rather push that out than push out what the terrorists in our own country are doing. And you know, the whole thing with Ferguson, you know, Black Lives Matter was kind of launched back then. But during these, you know, memorials for this guy, another police officer did get critically injured. He's got a brain injury, and that's all I know so far. But those are the things they rather push in front of us because that just creates more problems in, you know, African American community and the brown community. So, you know, it's just more things to, well, don't pay attention to the terrorists in the country. Let's talk about, you know, let's go back to the rioting and all the things that happened in Ferguson 10 years ago. So obviously the media is not doing its job. It hasn't done its job in years. But it's really, you know, disturbing to see the Americans that are in these protests, well, what starts out as protest. And you say to these young kids, do you even know who Hamas is? And they just associate Hamas with Muslims and peaceful, you know, mosques and Islamic centers and, you know, on college campus organizations that are so friendly and that help the community. They have no idea that they're dealing with terrorists. And so I'm baffled as to why we continue to let these foreign organizations on our soil, and instead of stomping them out, we're letting them flourish. And CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, along with the Muslim Brotherhood, they just continue to open more organizations. They just raise just phenomenal amounts of money, and yet we allow that. I'm sure we're not looking into where that money is raised or put into accounts or anything else. So it's really kind of frustrating.
It's been a good while. I think 07, 08 was when they had the Holy Land Foundation trial, and that's when our FBI, I guess, was still at that time somewhat doing their job. And if I remember correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically the FBI at the time said that CARE is Hamas. And Hamas was then recognized as a terrorist group by our government.
Yeah.
Now, has that status of terrorist group ever been revoked for Hamas?
No, it has not. It's still on the Foreign Terrorist Organization through the State Department. It's still on their list. And what did we get out of that trial? I think there was 109 indictments handed down, and there was a list of co-conspirators. And remember, CARE was, Nihad Awad was one of the co-conspirators. But that was never thrown out. That could be, it very well could have been thrown out, and we never would know. But the fact that these people still exist and publicly exist, they're not hiding anymore. And that's the thing, we just don't pay attention to what's on the internet and to the amount of people that have come into this country that don't like us. And we've been doing it for years, and I'm sure there's a lot of eye rolling going on, like, oh, we're at it again. But I do think that more people are waking up. I think more people are suggesting, well, it can't be all Muslims in this country. And I always try to tell them, I feel that if a Muslim tells you that they believe in the Shahada, they repeat the Shahada, there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is the Prophet, or if they believe in Sharia law, they are a threat to this country.
Absolutely.
And they openly declare this. And we've got our own organization in Nashville, the American Muslim Advisory Council, that has members that have purposely and intentionally and knowingly used Muslim Brotherhood ideology in their talks and in their training. And it's funny, I look back on about 5 years ago, I taught law enforcement a class on Middle Eastern crime, culture, and community. And it wasn't anti-Muslim. It was about what to look for in this country and how to identify certain things. And CARE stepped in and wanted that shut down. Well, the Department of Defense, who held the contract, said, no problem. So now we have members of AMAC, the American Muslim Advisory Council, which has used Hamas and CARE in different presentations. They've embraced Linda Sarsour, who is the biggest anti-Jew, anti-American Muslim around. We know the connections. Rashida Tlaib, Omar, Suleiman. Not Omar Suleiman. We're going to talk about him next. But these connections, people are like, well, there's the dots, and we're saying, well, there's the connection with those dots. And it is in our backyard. Nashville has 4 mosques now, 4 Islamic centers now. We know that they've been funded by NATE, the North American Islamic Trust, which is a Muslim Brotherhood group. We know that they've been visited by extremists. And I know a lot of people don't like that word. David, if you're watching, that's for you, that extremist word. But this is what we're faced with. And there's no investigations ever launched. There's nothing ever said and done. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been allowed to enter this country. They're living amongst us. And, when you talk about jihad, so many people still believe jihad means, in Arabic, it means to struggle. But in Islam, it means holy war. There's a big difference. And it's over 50 times mentioned in their holy book, in their Quran, about holy war, connotation for holy war. So there again, I go back to, they're telling us in several different ways, in their doctrines, in their holy book, what their intentions are, and yet we're okay with that. Yeah. You know, it's like a murderer saying, "I want to come and kill your kid," and we say, "Oh, okay," we move on, and then something happens, and so this is where we're at. And so to look back at what, go ahead.
One thing too that people have to understand: the jihad doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to strap a bomb to themselves and go blow up a bunch of people, okay? It could just mean that they're going to provide support for the people that do those kind of things. Or they're going to get involved politically and help undermine the communities. There's just a lot. It does not mean one thing, but it does mean that they are here to take over, infiltrate. And if you read, you mentioned earlier the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood, everything else flows from them. All the other organizations flowed from them. CAIR, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, you name it. They all came from them. And here in America, our FBI has had for years their explanatory memorandum that lays all this out. I don't know why every member of law enforcement and everybody in our military has not been made aware of these things. It just blows my mind that we're that stupid and incompetent not to get the word out about those things.
Well, everybody wants the manifesto from the young girl that killed everybody at the Covenant School, and not to be dismissive of that, it was horrible. But when you're talking about these manifestos that everybody can't wait to read, but yet there's one in particular that no one wants to believe exists, and that includes law enforcement and our intelligence and our military. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in those agencies that do understand this, but it's the higher ups that are the problem. When you have a commander of an entire police department in the UK and you open your comments with Assalamu alaikum, which is the Islamic greeting, that's pretty sad. Yeah. I think that's really kind of sad, because then we're bowing once again. And as a matter of fact, I still believe that the Metro and Nashville police are being trained when it comes to learning about Islam. They're actually being trained in the Nashville Mosque, the Islamic Center in Nashville. I believe they're still doing that. They did it for years. And we used to put that out there all the time, that police officers in uniform are attending training at this place. And yet they still continue to do it. They still continue to, feed the whitewash version of Islam. And yet we're okay with that. And I think that's where our problem is. Are we that arrogant or that stupid to have this wonderful document that was seized by the FBI, that was evidence in a trial, that helped get members indicted, and yet law enforcement dismisses it? And I fail to understand the logic behind that. Yeah. Because when they tell you they're coming from within, that's a threat. And there's many other kind of overt, maybe some are overt, but those statements are made throughout that document. Right. And that's, I guess, what amazes me is you and I have read the document several times. I mean, several times. And yet no one else seems to be interested. And I think it's our lack of just wanting to do the right thing. I don't know. They purged all these documents from FBI training, and I think that's half the problem. Right. That law enforcement isn't being trained.
But that's no excuse at the state level, in my opinion. I mean, first off, by now everybody should question the competence and even the intention of the FBI. So our states, if they're still relying on the FBI, then shame on them. They should say, hey, we need to figure out what the threats are for ourselves here, and the information's out there. They should use it. But one thing I want to hit real quick. You mentioned earlier about the situation in Britain, and you mentioned that they're up to maybe 6% population in Britain, and we don't really know what it is. But I think two things here. Number one, their government is much like ours. It's all about bringing in these people from other countries to change the culture. I mean, both governments are guilty of that. But then it doesn't take a lot of violent Muslims to cause problems. There are no-go zones in England. There's no-go zones all throughout Europe. And they're not a majority in any of these countries, but they still have control. Now, we've got them up in Michigan. We got a lot of them. I guess they've taken over several towns around there. I don't know that they control Detroit. Maybe they don't want it. I don't know. But they've taken over other towns up there. It doesn't take a majority to cause a lot of problems. And so people think, if people think just, well, the percentage is low, we don't have to worry. No, you don't have to have a huge percentage of them for them to be a real problem and a real threat.
Not at all. And I guess that's, that's something that it just kind of blows my mind, because the percentage of Muslims in Islam itself in the UK, they predict by 2050 that Islam will become the second largest. It'll replace, it'll replace not Christianity, but Judaism will be number 3, and Islam will be number 2. That's what they're saying. And also the percentage of Muslims. And so, if people are saying that's over in the UK, if you just watch the trends, though, that come from there, we're next. And they're saying we're next. I see in my last article that I wrote just yesterday, I talk about yet another terrorist group in America. And it amazes me, though, how the money and everything that's coming in from the UK to here to fund these organizations. And again, if we take out of a bank $10,000 or more, there has to be a cash transaction report that the FBI sees. And so we've got all this money coming in. I believe this group that I'm going to talk about in a second is called Cage International. They've raised over $850,000 in this country alone over the last few months. So where is their money? Where is that money? Why are we not going after that money? We seem to seize American, money when we've 10,000 or more, and we're talking 850,000. This organization, it was kind of interesting because the title of the article that was sent to me was regarding the warning to the West, basically, is what's coming. And it's called Cage International. It's an anti-Jewish, anti-American advocacy group that appears as a human rights group. And what they're doing is they're now questioning our justice system and the terrorists that we have that have been arrested and have been convicted, tried and convicted, and have been sentenced to prisons here. They're questioning the whole trial process. And so they're making it out as their victims, as now they're political prisoners in America. And one of them her name is Aifa Siddiqui. She was a Pakistani scientist, and she was arrested several years ago in Afghanistan. The plot was to kill several American soldiers that were in Afghanistan. And so she came back here and she was arrested here. And so she's doing time in a prison in Texas. And they've been holding these rallies to free Sister Aifa when, our justice system has already played out. But they're making it more into a human rights issue. We've got the guy from Texas, the Fort Hood killer. We have a lot of these terrorists that are in custody. We don't hear about them very much. They're prisoners. We shouldn't hear about them. And same with Guantanamo Bay. I believe there's only maybe a few, I was going to call them customers. Well, I guess they are customers. A few prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. And they want that. Again, they want that shut down. They want those prisoners not transferred to another prison, but released, because they feel that it's a human rights. And they also use the term civil rights. So here again, we have another organization that has come to this country. They started in the UK several years ago, and there's a Muslim by the name of Omar Suleiman, who is the head of Yaqeen Institute, which is out of Irving, Texas. And he and our friend from Memphis, Yasser Qadi, have been pairing up, trying to get this organization off the ground. And it's very possible they will. They talk about Muslim persecution, they talk about Islamophobia, and we know how so many Americans, especially the interfaith crowd, have latched on to these ideologies that oh, they're persecuted, they're all victims, and they're not. Aifa Siddiqui, they found her thumb drive that had the plans. It was her and her husband who had this pretty detailed plan to kill all these Americans. And so then she fled here, and so she's doing time, and they want these people released. My fear is at some point, probably not this year, but in a few years down the road, with enough pressure, that they will release these prisoners. Yeah. And then, where does that leave us? Again,
the name of this organization is CAGE, C-A-G-E. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. CAGE International. Yeah. And they're just going by, they used to be Cage for Prisoners, and now it's just, a lot of times you might be, hearing it just called CAGE. But that is an anti-American, anti-Jewish. Omar Suleiman, who's running the show here, is pro, the BDS movement, very pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas. There's a surprise. And, you can go and search these things on YouTube, and you'll hear him. As a matter of fact, I made a link on that article to his talk out in front of the prison where Aifa Siddiqui is. But also, too, if you go to that article on dailyrollcall.com, there's an imam who just last week was making the declaration in the next few generations that Islam will wipe out Christianity in Western Europe. And we know, obviously, that's the goal here, too. So he describes in detail what would happen when the Muslims take over, about how we will be slaves. If we choose not to be a slave, we'll be a tax. They'll post a jizya on you or tax on you, and then you'll be a slave. So these are the things they talk about in their doctrines, certainly in their hadiths and things. It all talks about Christians being converted to Islam. But then also on the very bottom, there's something kind of interesting. It's called the Conscious Muslim Guide. And I would urge everybody to take a look at that. They're it's very anti-American. They talk about not living under Abrahamic Accord, but rather under I think it's called the General South of the General South countries, which are China and some other places over in Asia, which is interesting because they're communist countries. So, but it's interesting, and I've got the link to that as well on that article. So, I know it sounds like a lot, and it's overwhelming, but there we have it.
Well, real quick on that. So, they said that Europe will be Muslim by 2050. Well, that they'll replace Christian. Well, Europe doesn't have much of a church, period. And they haven't for years. So that's not going to be a huge task. We have more of a church here, but I don't see a whole lot of backbone here. Okay, I see a lot of kumbaya with the Islamist. I see a lot of can't we all just get along? So I don't think it's near as strong here as we would like to think, especially with all the interfaith garbage. But remember, so it doesn't take that many of them. They're really up against a weak opposition if you're looking at the church in Europe, and they have been here for we've had them for a long time, but they've been really active since the early 60s. And they've just got their tentacles everywhere. And people need to understand it doesn't take a huge number of dedicated people to accomplish a lot of evil things. I mean, history shows you that. It's not always the majority that does all these atrocious things. It's maybe the majority that's not pushing back. Maybe the majority that doesn't have a clue, or has a clue but doesn't have a backbone to go with that clue. I think that's what we're up against here to a great degree.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking criminals, we're and I guess that's the thing that boggles, forget the word terrorists, we're talking about criminals, and they just made an arrest of I think he was 16 years old, an Austrian 16-year-old boy who said he was going to kill as many as he could kill at a Taylor Swift concert. And, they've arrested him, and they did find all kinds of explosive chemicals in his vehicle. But there's a 16-year-old who's probably been fed, like here, that there are friends and that they're good people and that they're only here for this reason. And, they said that he did get a lot of training from the internet. Yep. But 16 years old. And this is, amongst all the other stuff that kids are, having to listen to and deal with, it's a very real threat, because the Islamists, that's the age group that they like to go after, especially in like the not the jails that these kids are in, but certainly where they're detained. They bring the Quran to them and they teach them that there's a better way and be a better man when you come out if you convert to Islam. And we learned, back when I was still training law enforcement, we learned that there are, I believe it was in Michigan, that when the call to prayer goes out in some of these prisons, that the prison guards are not even allowed to go into that area of the prison during prayer time. And so now we have prisoners that are kind of left to do whatever they please. They're given a Quran, they're given their, the mat, the prayer mat, they're given the wudu so that they can properly wash themselves. And so then we leave them alone, and not that they have weapons in the prisons, per se, but it's all about indoctrination. It's all about bringing more people to Islam. And that's, so when you said that there's tentacles everywhere, there certainly are. And, and when you say interfaith, and when I always kind of giggle when I say interfaith, because I believe that it's really a shame that Christians would honor another God. I think Christians don't get maybe the 10 Commandments where you're not supposed to idolize another God or,
I think it's in there somewhere.
God.
Yeah. Like maybe number one, I think maybe it's like the first thing.
That's what they're doing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, so when you acknowledge that there's another God, when you say, that there's another God, or you talk about there's another God, I think these Christians are kind of forgetting that that's against one of the 10 Commandments, Yep. But those things are all kind of, I don't know, they're pushed aside because we're overwhelmed with everything else. And I get it. But, you and I and some in our group, certainly the people in Daily Roll Call, we've been talking about this for a long time. And when you see, people like Rashida Tlaib and Zulfat Sawara from Nashville, when you see them elected into positions of power, not even so much power, but the ability to affect change. And that's where they'll come from within. Yep. By effecting change. And they do. They start making the laws to fit their agenda. And, there's a lot of Sharia courts in New Jersey. And so, we give it to the people to learn. And we certainly have resources where people can learn. And I don't think many are doing it, Dave.
Let's remind the people of some of the things that have happened in Tennessee over the last 10 or 12 years. And then some of the people within Tennessee that have, known international connections to international terrorists. And let's kind of paint that picture so that people understand here in Tennessee what's already happened. Go a little more in depth, if you can, on the relationships. And, hey, what we could be doing as a state, since if you're waiting on the feds, you're stupid.
Well, let's see. You're picking my brain about some things. I think, we had the terrorist incident in Chattanooga.
Yep.
With the recruiting station.
Right. Carlos Bledsoe in Nashville. And then we know, though, that there's a lot of groups that haven't been necessary. We've got the Jerusalem Fund, which certainly, that's real. I won't get into that because that could be another 2-day show, actually. But we have people connected to these things like Samar Ali out of Nashville. We have Zulfat Sawara in Nashville. We've got the Islamic Center
that are funded by the North American Islamic Trust, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm really stretching my brain here, Dave, trying to think of other incidents
You've got a
that have
huge,
happened.
you also have a huge presence in the Memphis area of the people from Qatar, and of course Qatar, that's where some of they have a reputation of being involved with terrorist financing. And I think one of the guys, and I can't recall his name, but if I could, I couldn't pronounce it anyway, is the one who coined the phrase, basically saying that Sharia compliant finance is jihad with money. And he has, in that bank, there's connections to, you mentioned Samara Ali and her husband, there's connections there. Okay, so, and people just don't see the big picture. Qatar is a problem. You mentioned Yasser Qadi, who's now down in Dallas, but he was in Memphis for years.
Yeah, and he is an extreme radical imam. He was at the time. You can find some of his sermons on YouTube. He doesn't appear to be anti-American, but he's very anti-Jewish, very anti-American. There's been other things. Losing our sons was based on certainly Carlos Bledsoe. That was the whole thing that happened down in Chattanooga. But people forget these things. Off the top of my head, I'm having a hard time recalling some things. But the connections, we've not only put the dots out there, we've connected the dots. Yep. And I think that's what upsets so many people is, Zulfat Sawara in Nashville, she's a elected official. She's on the board, the commission in Nashville. She's a member at large. And so, she has connections with Nigeria, and yet she fails to talk about the Christians that are being slaughtered in Nigeria today. It isn't something that happened years ago. It's still happening today. And we've got, AMAC, the American Muslim Advisory Council, who has done nothing but embrace anti-American and anti-Jewish rhetoric. We have Dawood Abu Diab, who's leading, the Muslims that seat at the table, or the Faith and Culture Center out of Nashville. And so, and he's Palestinian. And so obviously he's pro-Palestine. But, they never talk about the things that are happening in their country. I often thought the other day, all these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protesters, well, the door's open, go there and protect your country if that's, how you feel. But we do have a lot of connections, and then to throw in, we've got Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, Gloria Johnson, the famous threesome, that got booted. Well, Gloria didn't get booted, but their connections to certainly Linda Sarsour and some of the other anti-Jewish people. They believe in the BDS movement, the boycott, divest movement. And so, there's connections to be made everywhere. And I believe if you embrace these, then you believe in their ideology. And that's what we need to be looking at. And we need to stop electing these people because this is what is happening. And eventually you're going to have so many people in Congress that are Islamists that our laws will start to change. When I mentioned before, we had Sharia courts in New Jersey. Right now, there's Sharia divorce, basically for divorces between Muslims. But that's going to change. I'm sure eventually they'll start using it in a criminal way, especially if we continue to believe that, Muslims are victims and that they're being persecuted. And, I just wish people would look over and pay attention to what's happening in the UK and then understand what we've talked about for years, the build up here. Right. And I think the next time, Dave, we should go over some of the stages. I don't think we've done that in a while. The 4 stages of conquest, and break down, where we are, what stage we are in, because I think people might be a little surprised to know that we're close to at least stage 3.
Yeah. Well, can you just go over those real quick? We don't have to go in depth. Can you just hit those real quick?
Okay. There's infiltration, indoctrination, and then I'm sorry, I can't remember number 3, and the 4th is the institution, of their Sharia law and of all their concepts. Yeah. And so, as far as following the religion and you being a slave, I know people are saying, no, we have a constitution that'll never happen here. If it's happening in other countries, which it is, then it's just apparent to me that it eventually, with the number of Islamists that we have in this country, but under each subsection, when you talk about the infiltration, is one of the first parts, and so you start to look at all the places that they are, like you said before, they are everywhere. They're in the education system, they're in the finance, they're into everything, including government, local government, state government. They're into every aspect of our society.
They're in Stewart County,
Tennessee.
The
infiltration.
They're in Stewart County, Tennessee. You have.
Well, yeah, we didn't talk about.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about them. That's
Dober.
Yeah, you have the Jamaat al-Fuqaha Muslims of America. They're there. They're New York. They're in Tennessee. They're in Georgia. They've got a camp in West Virginia. They've got some in Texas, California, all over.
Yeah.
And they follow. I cannot recall the imam's name. Or their leader's actually over
Sheikh
Jilani from Pakistan. Yeah. That's who they follow, and they have a magazine, a magazine that's published. I don't know if it's weekly or daily or whatever. I have actually a newspaper that is. I've actually read some of it. I don't still have a copy, but they are just full-fledged Islamists now. And here's how the kind of thing that happens. So, for instance, they've been in Dover since the very early 80s, outside of Dover in this compound. And I've talked to different people that live there. I mean, I haven't lived there. I've only lived there since 2000. But if you read about the organization, which it used to be watched by the FBI, okay? FBI used to keep an eye on it. And now that's the same organization. When I say the same, I'm not saying it's necessarily the same people, but that same organization was out in Colorado, out in the late 90s, late 80s, late 90s. And I mean, they were the Colorado Department of, the Colorado State Police and their AG and others got involved with the situation out there because I think they found some explosives or something on there, but
yes,
they couldn't even get the help they needed at the time from the FBI. But I mean, these guys were obviously very well organized, and they were out in, like I say, that was Colorado years ago. Now, I remember when I first got to Colorado in the late 80s, late 89, I remember that a weapon, an M16 had been stolen from Fort Carson. Fort Carson is not too far from Denver. And I remember that weapon had turned up and it was used in a murder. I remember it seems like then there was some sort of connection to a group. I can't recall which group, but I mean, they were thick there as well. I mean, they are everywhere. And people, they think, because nothing's blown up yet, does that mean that they're not doing things in other places? Does that mean that they're not raising money and sending it to terrorists? And I understand you can't do something about all of these things, but there's no reason that our people and our law enforcement and our people in our communities don't know what they're about. I mean, they should understand that their beliefs are incompatible with our Constitution, cut and dried. Now, we can't
very much so.
We can't tell them, you can't believe this, but we need to at least know what their ideology is and be aware of things that they can do to advance their goal and undermine our country. And it's just a shame to me that after everything that's happened that we're not there. We're actually further down the road of them having even more power.
Well, the one in Hancock, New York, that I had been to on a couple occasions, the Muslims of America. I had been out there a couple of times, and the one particular time that I was there was Women's Weekend, and so we were greeted by women when we tried to get down the road. And I remember her saying that she would invite me in, but they wanted to have me vetted through the FBI before I came on their compound. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. I had to be vetted. But then I think the thing that really, I know, right? The thing that really blew my mind was I went into Hancock to see the police chief. And I remember asking him, how do you deal with this when you know that there's things happening? Because the whole town would feel the excitement and feel the presence when the Sheikh Jelani would come in from Pakistan. And so I started to kind of pick his brain, and he got annoyed with me, and he said, I'm told to leave them alone. And of course that, kind of made me say, well, who told you that? And he said, officer, I'm telling you, we were told to leave them alone. And that was the end of the conversation. So, they still exist. And yeah. Ryan Morrow, if anybody's familiar with his work, he's on Fox News a lot. And he's a young guy that has gone out there different times with, hidden cameras and things. And he has done quite a few documentaries on their activities. And of course, in the middle of rural America, it's not unheard of to hear gunshots. But certainly when you start hearing explosives, nothing major, but, small explosives, I think you'd want to start looking into that, But yeah. I remember, too, the one out in Dover, we had that young boy that had died.
Yep.
Remember that?
Yep, I remember that.
And we kind of tried to investigate because they took his body to another compound. I think it was
in
North
South Carolina. South Carolina. Yep.
So there's just, there was so many things that just are, that don't make sense. But if they don't make sense to us, then I don't understand why law enforcement wouldn't have the same questions. And I'm retired law enforcement, and I love law enforcement. But I think a lot of our leaders, a lot of the supervisors and above, I think that there's some problems there. I think that they're not willing to get involved in the religious aspect or what they think is the religious aspect. So it goes unchecked. And, our FBI is not, I don't consider them to be working now.
Not for us anyway.
Yeah, no, so it's really very, very unfortunate. But, I really hope, I've delivered. I got a lot, to tell people. Just a small smidgen of, what we normally cover. But I did cover it pretty fast. But I do hope that people take the time to listen to what we're saying. Do your own research. We're not afraid of our research. We write these things. We have never been sued. We can't be sued if we use their own words, their own pictures, their own doctrine, their own manifestos.
And that's all on your website, dailyrollcall.com. You've got the explanatory memorandum. You've got all these different things that we've talked about. It's all there.
Yes. Yeah, it's there. And it's really nothing more than what, all the intel agencies have, the manifesto. These things are, and I'll just say this about the manifesto. The first several pages, for those that are interested and might go try to look it up, first several pages are obviously in Arabic. Keep going and you'll find the English version. Right. And that has the stamp of, being put into evidence in that trial. So it's not us. We didn't write it. We didn't make it up. It's there. Yeah. So I hope people do. I hope they go and, look into that. And also, my book, The Threat in Our Backyard, available on Amazon, talks about all of these things that we just talked about. Yep. I get into naming who these people are and where they are.
Real quick, assuming we had a governor in the state of Tennessee who realized they were a problem, and we know that he doesn't, since that's one of the first groups that he met with even before he was in office. We've got the pictures and all that. But if Tennessee as a state realize that, okay, look, this is something we need to get on top of and at least know what's going on. We need to make sure our law enforcement and our other officials know what to look for. What if we had people inclined to do that, what would be some of your suggestions? I mean, well, I know that wasn't planned. It just kind of popped up.
No, that's fine. Dave, I think many of them know who we are. We've had conversations with many of them, especially when we were talking about the refugee stuff, that was coming down the pipe. So I think they should research our website, and I'm not just trying to promote the website, but there is just volumes of information there about a lot of different organizations. You can plug in a name or an organization. They can reach out to us. We're always available. I know that you've been involved in chats with different members of our state representatives, as I have, and some of our other team members at Daily Roll Call have. But I think they need, the documents are there. There's a lot of the documents that you just mentioned that are on the website. I would encourage them to read it if they have questions. What's kind of funny is before that picture that you referred to of, Bill Lee came out, I had met him. Representative Sheila Butt had introduced me to him, and he had said to me that he knew what the work was that we did, and that he was anxious to meet with us, and that he would be in touch, if he won the race. And then, he shook my hand and said that he knew who we were. I mean, he listened to the radio. And what was interesting, I think it was maybe 10 days after he was sworn in, that was the picture of him with the members of AMAC.
Yeah.
And, that was an ugly time, because we thought about that picture, and then we posted that picture. And some people were not happy with us,
Yep.
and others were absolutely disgusted that he had done that.
Yep.
But, that relationship never happened. But
yeah, he was actually more anxious to meet.
us.
Yeah, he was actually more anxious to meet with them than he was with you or any of us. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Pretty sad, Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on. Thanks for what you do, and definitely have you back. And just appreciate all the work.
Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it, and I thank you for having me on too. And certainly, I did talk pretty fast tonight, so
that's fine.
I hope that people, go to the website dailyrollcall.com, and they can read for themselves.
Yeah. And it's a good book. It's not a long book, but it's got a lot of good information in it. So, hey, I've got some announcements and information about our guest next week in just a few minutes. But I want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, so you never miss an episode. It helps keep us on the program. We appreciate your support. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, KeenanInformer.com. Montgomery for Liberty meets tomorrow night, August 13th, 6:30 p.m. at the Tap House 57, located at 2670 Madison Street, Unit C in Clarksville. The Tennessee Cognitive Liberty Conference will be held in Nashville August 16th and 17th. Go to cognitivelibertyconference.com for more information and tickets. You can't stand up for your rights if you don't know what they are. Every third Friday in White County, you can find out what they are. You can go to Sparta Green Market, visit the Constitution table, and bring your questions. Learn about educational events for we the people on topics such as natural, God-given rights that our elected officials are sworn to secure. Learn about state sovereignty and sign a petition in support of restoring it. The table is located in front of Synergy Herbal Works. Upcoming this Friday, August 19th from 4 to 7 is the next table. Seats are going fast starting Tuesday, September 3rd, and this will be a Constitution training event for 12 consecutive weeks from 6 p.m. Till 7:30 each night. It will be at the Fragrant Mushroom near Liberty Square in Sparta. It's a course on the U.S. Constitution. Your instructors are Brian and Robin Gregg. Once you learn how your country is supposed to be run and what you can do constitutionally to help turn this country around, you'll never feel the same hopelessness again. The cost is $35 just for the student manual. Please contact Danny Blitz, the TNCSS White County leader, with questions at TNCSS, that's Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty. And if you would like to attend, you can email her at dbfiles@, and I cannot read that. Anyway, the note, it's up there. Saturday, September 7th, Tennessee Firearms Association Legislative Action Council will hold its annual fundraiser at Farm Bureau Expo Center, located at James E. Ward Ag Center, 945 East Batter Parkway, Lebanon, Tennessee. Order your tickets online at tfalac.org/2024 annual event. This year's speakers are Pete Hedgepeth of Fox News, Representative Mark Green, and GOA Vice President Eric Pratt Sr. Please visit the site for more details. Our guest next Monday night will be Rick Revel, an award-winning musician and historical reenactor, debuting a brand new music video just released from his album. And this one is about the removal of our historical monuments and our heritage. We talked about that a little bit earlier in this episode. It's quickly becoming the new Southern anthem. You don't want to miss this. Joining him will be Walter Donnie Kennedy, Lieutenant Commander of the SCV, that's Sons of Confederate Veterans, who is also the Chief of Heritage Operations. They'll share their efforts to resurrect our Southern statues and monuments. And they are actually putting up monuments in other places as we speak. Hope you'll join us. That's it for now, and good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.